Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I hope you all are doing well. Today we are going to be talking about how you can use some of the indicators which are freely available out there to maybe help your current strategy, or you could actually use them to put together a formal strategy which you can use to trade daily. So today we are looking at pivot points. So what are pivot points? So what pivot points are is that it takes the previous high and the previous low of the previous day, and it actually calculates a few things there. So firstly, it calculates your pivot point, which is actually the average of the previous high of the previous day and the previous low, and that actually gives you a pivot point. It also uses those different ranges to give you a few different resistance and support levels. So as you can see, it'll give you R1, R2, R3. It'll also give you S1, S2, and S3. And these are all calculated basically on the range of the previous day. So I'm going to show you this in a practical example. So right now I'm on the Australian dollar to the US dollar. If I have a look at this, we can say we started the day yesterday. On the 1 hour chart, we can see that we started the day here. Right. So this is our low of the day. And we can see that this is actually our high of the day. So it takes those two figures, the high of the day and the low of the day, and it actually gives you the average, which is the pivot point, right? So as you can see, today's pivot point basically is kind of the average of those two. What it then does is that it also takes those figures and it gives you a range in regards to where you can find your resistance 1, your resistance 2, your resistance 3. So as we can see right here on AUD USD, price is slowly approaching R2. Right, it's also the same for your support levels. We can see here it's given us a calculation for S1, S2, and right at the bottom here, also S3, right? And all of these calculations basically are based on the high of yesterday and the low of yesterday, and it actually calculates those ranges based on your pivot points. Okay, so how could you use this information basically to kind of put together a strategy, or how could you use this information to help your existing strategy? Okay, so if you have a look right now, we can see that on AUD USD, price has actually broken the pivot point, right? And it's also broken the R1 level. And right now it's actually heading to R2 level. So what you could have done is that once you saw that price was now trading above the pivot point, you could have either entered on R1, looking to maybe take profit on R2, putting your stop loss just below the pivot point here. That is one potential way you could do it. Or what you could also do is that if you want to get more confluence on your trades, you could also use the moving average. So if you have a look at my chart, you can see that I have the 50-day moving average on my chart. So you could say if price is, for example, above the pivot point and it is also above the moving average, you are only looking at taking long trades. The opposite if you want to go short. If you see that the price is below the pivot point and it is also below the moving average, you'd only be interested in taking short trades. Now, one thing I want to point out to you is that, your pivot points don't change based on the time frame you are looking at. So if I was to come to the 15-minute chart, even though it's a smaller time frame, my pivot point is actually still going to be in the same area. Your moving average might change because obviously you've changed your time frame, but your pivot point is going to still be in the same area. The same goes for your 4-hour chart, right? Obviously, there's less bars in it because of the 4-hour chart, but your pivot points would pretty much stay the same. So let's go back to the 1-hour chart, and let's see some examples of how you could actually use this. So if we go to another pair, okay, so now this is EURGBP. As we can see on the 1-hour chart, we can see that price is below the pivot point, and we can also now start to see that price is actually testing this moving average, the 50-day moving average. It's already tested S1, so we could potentially see a move down here now that we've seen that it's tested the moving average, and we can see some long wicks here, some long rejection wicks. You could probably take a trade and actually maybe take profit either on S2 or S1 if you are being a bit safe. A good place to actually put your stop loss on this is just above the wicks here, or you could actually be safe and put it at R1. Okay. Another great example here is on pound AUD, where we can actually see that price started the day off below the pivot point. Even though it was in between the moving average, it's now tested that moving average and it's actually broken that moving average. It's also broken the S1 support. So we can see now that price is starting to make a downward movement. You could actually maybe look at taking trades at S1 and maybe putting your stop loss at the pivot point, or actually also putting your take profit at S2. So there's multiple ways you can actually enter this trade based on your strategy and your checklists. Another great example is EURAUD right now, where we can see that price actually broke S1, it's now headed to S2. Price started the day off below the pivot point and again in between the moving average, but it broke that moving average and it's now on a downward trend to S2. We could see a test of S2 and then coming back to test S1 again before it continues down to actually go back down to S3. Okay, so this is an interesting one. We can see here from the previous days, price has actually been below the pivot point yesterday, and the previous day it was kind of playing in between the pivot point, but all still below the moving average. Now, this is an interesting one because what we potentially could see is that if with a candle closes and we can see a big rejection wick here, we can see there's some lows which have formed here. We potentially could see this price actually have a move upward where it actually breaks the pivot point and it probably breaks the moving average as well, comes to test these highs here and probably test the moving average and the pivot point, and we could potentially see an upward movement on this trade. We'd have to wait and see how it plays out. But the pivot points basically would be a great way to target where do you want to take profit and also where do you want to enter. I would be looking maybe to enter here based on a retest of a pivot point and maybe the moving average. And I would want to maybe put my stop loss at R1 and maybe my take profit at R1 and maybe my stop loss just below the pivot point or S1, depending on what the chart is looking like at that time. Okay, EURJPY, we can see again here that price started below the pivot point on the day. There's actually a great example of price starting below the pivot point on the day, also starting below the moving average, and it came and it retested this pivot point here. And at the same time, it was actually retesting the moving average. And as you can see, right about at the London Open, we saw it shoot down, right down, and actually take out that S1 level. So you could have had maybe a stop loss of 48 pips and gained about 57 or 58 pips. So not a bad trade at all. As you can see, within a few hours, it would have smashed your TP, and you'd be seeing some nice profits right now. Okay, guys, this was just a short video to show you how you can use pivot points and moving averages to help your current trading, or you could actually take this and put together some form of strategy which can help you actually trade the market. We want to try to do these videos more often, and we will see you in the next one.